Yes, Chair, and we are when you're ready.
That's lovely. Thank you. Good morning and welcome everybody to the Planning Committee on the 31st of August 2021 at 10 AM for Neath Talbot Council. This meeting will be taking place via the Teams protocol remotely. Therefore, please could I ask you to turn your phones to silent and also your microphones unless I call on you to speak. Keep it as quiet as you can in the background. I understand in domestic situations that's not always easy, but we'll understand if there's something like that. This meeting is recorded, so your continued presence in it deems that you accept that. Please don't use the chat function if there's anybody other than a member of the committee here. Well, even any members of the committee, we just have that for registering any dropouts of communication. I'll assume that you've all read today's papers, and there are also an amendment sheet and a presentation, which I assume you have had. If you haven't had any of all of those, please indicate. Can't see anything there. Okay, thank you very much. So that's the welcome. I'll go now to item 2, which is declarations of interest. I'll call on Tammy now to please take the roll call and also ask them at the same time if they have any declarations of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, certainly. Good morning, all.
Morning.
I will call your names, committee, and if you let me know at the time I call your name if you have a declaration of interest, please. So we'll start with yourself, Chair, Councillor Suzanne Paterson.
Yes, I am present and I have no declaration to make.
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair, Councillor Sean Percy.
Present and no interest to declare, Tammy.
Thank you. Councillor Dennis Keogh. You're on mute, Councillor.
Yeah, present and no declarations to make.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ros Davis.
Presennol, no declaration of interest.
Thank you. Councillor Scott Bamsey. Don't think Councillor Bamsey is present, so we move on to Councillor Steve Hunt.
I am here and I have no declaration of interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Arwyn Woolcock.
Yes, present, Chair. No declarations of interest to make this morning.
Thank you. Councillor Suzanne Renkes. I don't think Councillor Suzanne Renkes is present this morning. Move on to Councillor Mark Prothero, please.
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, I'm present and no declarations of interest to declare.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Rachel Taylor.
Morning, Tammy. Yes, present and no declaration to make.
Thank you, Councillor.
Tammy, left me out, Councillor Mason.
So, Councillor Mason, I do apologise.
Present. I can tell him I'm present. And I have no declarations of interest to declare.
Thank you, Councillor. That's great.
Smack on the wrist at the same time.
Yes, thank you. We move on now to local members present. Councillor Stephanie Lynch.
Present, and do I have to declare an interest?
No, that's okay. That's fine.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Officers, we have planning officers, Steve Ball.
Yes, present. Good morning, everybody.
Thank you. And Stephen Jenkins.
Yeah, present. Good morning, everyone.
Morning. Environmental Health Officer, Simon Evans.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Present.
Highways Officer, Justin Griffiths.
Present. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning. We have myself, Democratic Services Officer, Tammy Davis. Legal Officer, Craig Griffiths.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm present, Tammy.
Thank you. And present for the application P2021/0226, which is the Avon Lido application, Kate Harrison.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Have I missed anyone from the roll call?
Tammy, there was a message just now that Councillor Shanfregard was having difficulty getting it. Oh, I think there you go. I think Sharon's just popped up in my bottom right-hand corner.
Great. Okay, thank you. Councillor, I will add you to the local members.
Thank
Councillor Sharon Freegard. Thank you all.
Thanks, Tammy. Thanks very much, members. I'd just like to welcome our guests today, Councillor Sharon Freegard and Councillor Stephanie Lynch, who are speaking on different items. It's very nice to have you in committee today. And also to Mr. Craig Griffiths, who we don't often see in our planning committee, but welcome to you as well, Craig.
Good job.
Okay. Right, we've done declarations. We have to go to item 3, minutes of the last meetings. I need some ratification of these minutes. So we'll take you to the minutes on pages 5 to 12 in the bundle. And I will go to the minutes of the meeting for the 20th of July 2021. Can I have someone to propose they are a true record?
I move, Chair.
Seconded. Gideon, did you put your hand up then? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll move on then to the 27th of July 2021. That was the special meeting, the one item only meeting for the Centre of Rail Excellence. Can I have a proposer again?
I move, Chair.
Thank you. And a seconder? I can't see everybody, Tammy, so if you see some... Thank you, Councillor Hunt. That's lovely. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to put this onto large gallery so I can see more people. And then the final one, which is the 10th of August 2021. Do I have a mover? That they are a true record?
Yes, true record, Chair. Happy to
Thank you,
propose.
Councillor Hunt. And seconded?
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have done the minutes. I'll move on to item 4, which is the request for site visits. I have received no requests for site visits. Anybody in Democratic Services or Mr. Ball, have you received anything?
No, Chair.
That's fine. Okay, then. So we'll move on to the 3 items for decision today. 5, 6 and 7. We'll be taking them in the order that they're in the bundle. So I'll take you now then to, let's just get this on my screen as well. Item P 2021/0226, construction of 137 dwellings and associated roads, parking, landscaping and infrastructure at the former Avonlido site. So I'm going to call on Mr. Ball now to take the committee through the report. Mr. Ball?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
And good morning again, everybody. I'm assuming you can see the shared screen, Chair?
I can see it, Steve, yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Right, so the first application, as you said, Chair, is an application. It's P 2021-0226. It's the site of the former Avonlido and land to the southeast adjacent to Princess Margaret Way. And it's an application by Persimmon Homes, West Wales, for the construction of 137 dwellings, together associated roads, parking, landscaping and infrastructure. I imagine the site is probably familiar to, if not all of you, majority of you. It is a vacant site on the seafront. I'm sure most of you will be more than familiar from the aerial that you've got the leisure centre development, you've got the real cinema, you've got the existing cinema and kitchen and the A3 takeaway site on the front. And it's the site, as you can see, identified on the site, which is effectively 2 sites forming one part of site, split by channel view that goes down the centre. It fronts onto the sunken gardens and obviously generally in terms of Aberravon seafront. And again, there's an aerial just with a bit more detail, just in terms of the relationships between the nearby, obviously, residential areas and the beaches. So the application site itself is 3.1 hectares. I say it's 2 different parcels of land. The report goes into details about the local context, but as I say, you're more than familiar with that, I'm sure. It is of note that this is a site that is currently owned by the council. It was the former Avonlido and its overspill car park there. The application itself is a result effectively of the local authority procurement exercise, and there's actually more than one exercise because there was an original developer who pulled out. But this proposal comes forward as a result of that development opportunity, because this is an unallocated site, which will come forward shortly in terms of the principle of development. The application proposal is identified on plans in front of you. It is, as I say, 137 dwellings, and page 14 identifies that that's a range, a mix of different properties from 2-bed, 3-bed, 4-bed, and 2-bedroom apartments, and all of which have a varied nature in terms of their heights that can be 2, 2.5, and 3-story, as well as 4-story flats. And the 4-story flats are the ones that are framing the entrance into Channel View. This is something that we've been seeking on the scheme to primarily to ensure that the scheme not only meets the density requirements, but also meets our aspirations in terms of the quality of development and, landmark at the entrance to Channel View. The larger part of the site has its sole access off Channel View, which you can see where my cursor is shown off on here, and it's got a loop configuration that runs throughout the site, serving the property. So most of these front onto Princess Margaret Way, and the remainder have parking fronting onto the loop configuration. And on the other side, there are 2 accesses, one that comes off Princess Margaret Way itself, serving a small enclave at the end, and another one coming off Channel View, which goes through the site and also creates an extra access opportunity to the land to the north, should that come forward at any point in the future or require any such access that was required from the council perspective when they were marketing. The slide in front of you indicates just generally the style and nature and the relationship with the properties. So you'll see at the top plots 44 to 72. That effectively is on the left hand side. So I'll go back here on this property here, which is some flats. So it starts off with 4-story flats that then drop down into, say, 2.5 and 3-story, 2.5-story, 3-story, and then the flats fronting Channel View. And again, 93 to 119 in the middle. That again shows the flats that frame Channel View, and a variation of heights of properties. And you'll see that they're relatively contemporary elevations, both in terms of brickwork, cladding, coloured cladding, etc., all of which are served to give an interest, provide visual interest to the site. These are just for indication of the different house types. I won't go into detail, but you'll see that these effectively show the composite elements that all join together to create the varied street scene I've just identified on the earlier coloured drawing. In terms of the application itself, you'll note there's been this is a major development. It was subject to pre-application consultation as normal. There were a number of representations received at PAC stage, including 11 objections that had raised a number of issues that the applicant sought to address as far as possible. You also see that we've had, with the amendment sheet, there's been 7 representations received, which has been summarised both pages 17 onwards and also within the amendment sheet, just identifying some concerns generally about amenity, visual amenity, highways issues, but those are largely addressed within the report, and my presentation will come through now. So starting first in terms of the principal development, as I say, this is an allocated site, so that your local development plan identifies this site under policy H1 as the Avonlido and land to the rear of Toyne School. I think I said that right. It's an application, the actual allocation is for up to 150 dwelling units, and therefore it is particularly notable that the principle of residential redevelopment has already been accepted and therefore is acceptable in principle under this application. The only issue in terms of principle to consider therefore really is the site is also part of the Coastal Corridor Regeneration Scheme policy, CCRS1, and effectively refers to mixed use regeneration for residential as well as tourism/recreational uses. But as the scheme identifies, this is a solely residential scheme, and therefore while it's accorded with policy H1, it doesn't technically accord with the CCRS1 in terms of the mixed use anticipated. But what the report identifies at page 22 is this has been allocated for some time, this site. It has been marketed on more than one occasion, and effectively the opportunity for tourism and recreation hasn't been realised through that process. Moreover, since I've been in NPT over the last 8 years, Aberystwyth Seafront has changed markedly, and there's been lots of private and public investment, and effectively that has enhanced attractiveness to visitors. And while it hasn't generated interest, this proposal will bring about development on a site that has laid undeveloped for some time, and it will both provide vibrancy and an opportunity both in terms of delivering much needed new housing and bringing people to live and within the area, and therefore, while, as the report says, there have been some concerns about the principle not including that level of recreational tourism, it is considered to be accepted in principle even without the inclusion of recreational tourism within the context I've just described. Other matters in terms of principal development for density, as page 22 states, this is a high density development, effectively is excuse me, in region 44 dwellings per hectare, which is very much in compliance with policy BE1. It isn't quite at 150 units that was sought within the allocation, but it's not far off, and it's considered to ensure that there's an appropriate range and mix of properties, and without causing any adverse impact to visual amenity or residential amenity, as the report states that the application in terms of 137 units is considered to be an appropriate number and mix and density of development. Moving on to visual amenity, very briefly, I've already explained that the layout is considered to have been designed both in terms of individual house types and their relationship to each other to create effectively a sense of place, which accords with the aspirations within Planning Policy Wales and associated guidance. And generally speaking, the report identifies that we are quite satisfied that the type of accommodation, the range and mix and the materials palette that's been proposed, which is quite contemporary, but also sought to be hardware bearing, which will be obviously controlled by condition. We're quite satisfied that effectively this vacant brownfield site will be developed in a way which, while changing its character permanently, will be in a positive way, because it will improve the visual appearance of the area. It will make it a more desirable place to live, and it will enhance the general character of this very, very prominent seafront site, and will only serve to add to visual interest and benefit the wider seafront context. So on that basis, there's no objection to the visual amenity, because it will significantly enhance the character of the site. The landscaping of the site will be critical in this area, and the next two slides just indicate, just for your information, that there is a landscaping scheme in sight, and probably the critical point, apart from the individual points, trees and shrubs within the site, is to identify that there are drainage proposals along the front, which in the form of a narrow swales, which forms part of the sustainable drainage package on the frontage of there, and also on the frontage of the wider site. And those swales will be shallow ponds effectively, but also will be planted with additional trees, etc., all of which will not only provide the sustainable drainage, but also enhance the landscaped character of that site. Similarly, means of enclosure will be controlled, which will be critical on this seafront. That there are schemes put in place that identify it'll be low-level walls and railings, but they'll be controlled further by condition to make sure that they are acceptable. And other matters within the report talk about bin storage and secure storage for clothes drying, etc. There are certain matters that need to be controlled by condition, but largely we're happy that they are acceptable, subject to a bit more detail at condition stage. In terms of residential amenity, the report goes into quite a lot of detail, both in terms of the relationship of the site to existing residential properties. And obviously, if I go back, excuse me, to the site, so you've got existing residential properties. So you've got existing residential properties on the right-hand side of the screen, and you've got existing properties on Channel View, and you've got the Amenity at the top as well, the footwall, sorry. And the report goes into details both in terms of the relationship with those properties on Channel View, also on Princess Margaret Way, and Jersey Quay and the like. And generally speaking, what the report states is that we are more than happy that the relationship has been designed to be careful and not to have any unacceptable impacts, both in terms of issues of privacy, overbearing or overlooking or overshadowing impacts. And on that basis, there's no objection in terms of impact on the existing properties. The report also goes into detail about the relationships within the site to ensure that the relationship between properties is broadly acceptable, and it is broadly acceptable. There's some minor shortages of distances between properties, particularly relationship of the flats on Channel View and the balconies and the like, but those are considered to be acceptable, particularly within the context of a new development. So on that basis, there's no adverse impacts or concerns in respect to residential amenity. The report also goes in on page 32 to assess matters relating to noise, particularly in terms of construction issues, which are often a concern. And generally speaking, again, we're quite happy in terms of such matters, because it is a transient nature of construction, will be satisfactorily controlled through a construction method statement and management plan. And similarly, that we're not sure at the moment if there's going to be piling, etc. But if there is piling being proposed, a condition proposed in terms of method statement for piling to ensure that that's controlled. Also, in terms of residential amenity, the report identifies issues to do with lighting and lighting overspill. I'm sure you'll be aware that there's a need to ensure that any existing lighting sources, or indeed proposed lighting sources, don't have any adverse impact upon amenity or existing or proposed occupants. There were some changes required through the application in association with the estates in terms of our ownership to change some lighting to ensure there would be no substantial overspill. There's a very minor issue in terms of the top of page 34 in your report, which identifies lighting spill in the top right hand corner of the site near to the existing footpath access, etc., into the football club. And ultimately, what the report says is that the authority is seeking to ensure that that light is changed or removed as part of our own due diligence, effectively. However, even if it were to stay, the report identifies that that would not be of such significance that would warrant refusal of its application on that basis. Similarly, the report looks in terms of designing out crime and issues to do with permeability, and there's some issues raised by the design out crime officer, but the report identifies that we are satisfied as planners that the layout is appropriate and effectively takes into account the need for permeability, but also for the placemaking approach. So on that basis, there's no objections in terms of residential amenity, and we considered it would be in compliance with policies that seek to protect the same. In terms of highway safety, the report goes through the issues in terms of the relationship, both in terms of the internal access roads, parking standards, and the way in which they relate to each other. Also, the fact that it's been accompanied by a transport assessment, which looks to ensure that there's no adverse impact on the highway network. And very much in summary, we were with the opinion there's no objections raised by the highway engineers in respect of either of those matters. Also, having regard to the fact this is a sustainable site, it has connections into the actual travel network, and generally, as I say, car parking, cycle parking provided in accordance with our standards. And on that basis, although there have been some objections on highways from locals in terms of both the actual design itself, in terms of the number and nature of accesses, and issues in terms of concern about increasing in level of traffic, we are satisfied that there would be no unacceptable impact, having regard particularly to the fact that this is an allocated site and such matters have been considered. Ground contamination, air quality are all considered acceptable subject to condition, as is issues to do with surface water in terms of the need for sustainable drainage approval by our colleagues in engineering. One matter that's been raised within the amendment sheet relates to foul water. Now, if you haven't read, have a quick look through the amendment sheet, because we as officers are aware of some local concerns that have been raised by members about impact on or existing situations north of the site. Is it northwest of the site? And effectively, what we've done, we've liaised with Welsh Water recently just to ensure that they are aware of those concerns and just to request further clarification. And what Welsh Water have clarified is that they are aware of some existing issues within the area, but they are of the opinion that there are no issues or concerns that should be raised in terms of the actual capacity of the existing pumping station at Newbridge, which is proposed to be, or this development is supposed to line into. So therefore, hydraulic capacity is available, and while there may be issues downstream from that, they are operational matters for Welsh Water to address. Therefore, while we as an authority or individual ward members may wish to raise that further with Welsh Water, and I would probably encourage them to do so, for the planning process, it is not appropriate for us through planning to seek to prevent this new development, especially on an allocated site where such capacity does exist. So therefore, on that basis, there is no objection that we have or should be raising on matters related to foul water drainage. Other matters raised in the site in terms of flooding and biodiversity are all considered to be acceptable, subject to certain conditions. Similarly, in terms of renewable energy, the scheme has submitted an energy statement that complies with the policy and will be including PV system, photovoltaic PV on certain of the apartment blocks, and also sufficient electric vehicle charging points in properties with the integral garage, which is considered being in accordance with the general expectations these days of Welsh Government development. Finally, in terms of Section 106 plan obligations, members will be aware that we would normally be, a major development would normally have expectations for delivery of certain planning obligations. That might be affordable housing or open space or education, for example. But members will recall that effectively there's been, because this is our land, and there was development around the time it was allocated that was pushed into the replacement leader development, which is since completed, which incorporated additional facilities over and above what was considered essential at the time, and therefore a decision was made by members a number of years ago that there was no affordable housing was going to be required at this site. And similarly, education advises no issues in terms of education, and there is some on-site provision of informal space or spaces being provided as a local area of play within the site, all which therefore was considered to get to the conclusion that the application is acceptable against the policy within the LDP, and the recommendation therefore, Chair, on page 44 onwards, is that the application should be approved subject to conditions there listed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ball. I'll just get my list back up so I can see anybody raising hands. There we are. Okay, there we are then. Now, I am aware, I normally go to any speakers at the moment and then to local members, but the local member in this case is actually a member of the committee. So I will call now on Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm more than happy to let other members speak first if they
wish.
wish.
Right, that's fine then. Okay.
I don't have any hands up at the moment, but
I'll come back to you at the end then, Councillor. Okay, that's fine. Well, I'm going to throw it out to members of the committee now then. Do you have any questions or comments to make regarding this application? The first hand I see is Councillor Misons, followed by Councillor Hunt. Councillor Mison, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Yeah, I certainly welcome this development. It's exciting development to see that patch of land used up at last. You know, we've had problem with travellers on it, and you know, leading up to the old Raffle Club area, but there before. So I'm very excited to see this happening. I just I got no problem. I'd be supporting it, but just one problem, Steve. Not problem, but the question. I noticed there's electric charging points, but only for 2 of the models of houses, and I think it's about 5 different houses types there, off the top of my head. I just wondered why it's only electric charging points by 2. That's all. It's just a query.
Okay, thank you very much. Steve?
I mean, effectively what we've identified is or asked Persimmon to include electric vehicle charging points, that there is no absolute requirement for them to do so, because the existing future Wales refers to it on non-residential developments, but they are choosing to do so, and they have specifically chosen the ones with the integral garages so that the vehicle charging points are within those garages. Ultimately, that's a decision for them to make, and it wouldn't be appropriate for us to be dictating that more or specific units should have those identified. So, I mean, we're actually quite satisfied that I think 16% from my recollection of the units would have those points. And obviously other properties would have the opportunity to put them in themselves as in the future as well. But from a planning perspective, we're quite satisfied with the number and range of EV points that have been placed in the development.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay. I'm just going to go off piste a little. I've just seen a note I made to myself that when Councillor Renkis joined the meeting, it was after declarations of interest, and therefore I need to just ask Councillor Renkis if there are any declarations she needs to make.
No, I don't have any. I apologise. I joined a little bit late.
No, I understand. It can be difficult. Sorry, Councillor, but I made a note to myself and then ignored it. So that's been done now. So I'll proceed with the application now then. Councillor Hunt, did you raise a hand? Yes.
Did you call me then, Chair?
Yes, I did. Yes, Councillor. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I didn't know if you could hear me because it's at my end, I think. Steve, I have no issues with the report in front of us today. I think it's very well presented, and it does what it says on the tin again. So thank you for that. I think you've covered with conditions and so forth to provide something that's quite unique and special for the area. But going back to page 16, and I noticed there you mentioned that the developer, through their pact, have answered the 11 questions or those that have objected then with some of the reasons they've objected. I know some of them are quite straightforward to answer, but at the end of your presentation, you also mentioned that due to the fact that the Amenity was committed a long time ago, that there wasn't anywhere that we could have had social houses development within the particular site. So what I'm trying to ascertain is that Persimmons, are they targeting a specific a group of individuals or people? And for that reason, why I'm asking that is that I noticed something on those objections with regards to schools. If families were to occupy and there was a number of children, I couldn't find it in the report. It probably is there, but would the local schools have places and spaces for additional children? You know, I think it's important that any development is able to address all these concerns. And I'm sorry if I've missed it, but I did try to go through the whole report. Not at all, Councillor Hunt.
Yeah.
You know, I tried to go through to see where it had addressed some of these concerns, but I couldn't find it. So, but as I said, in all, I think it's a good application. I think it will, given that the site as it is, it will certainly improve it. You know, I do notice some of the comments about removing some of the parking, but because the Arbor is coming very popular, and I know I go down there quite often myself, and I was only down there yesterday and the day before, so I know how difficult it might be to park, but it's a wonderful area to explore. But as I said, I just thought a couple of things, Chair. Do apologise if I missed it. Thank you.
No problem at all, Councillor Hunt. The item regarding question regarding schools for the site, Steve, has that been taken into account?
Yes, Chair. I mean, thank you, Councillor. I mean, I referred to the section 1.6 side of things. I mean, page 43 of the report addresses the point. We do consult with education, and they have advised us that this will have no significant impact on education provision, with deficit spaces affected places and effectively there would be no requirement for it. That being said, even had they said there is a requirement for education contributions, we would not have been able to achieve them on this site because of the decision being made by members in the past. But ultimately, if there is a requirement for education, then we as an authority have a statutory duty to provide that if it cannot be provided through the planning system. And in this case, there is no identified need for any such provision or additional provision as a result of this development anyway. So that's the advice we've received from education. Education is always a tricky one, as all members will know, and you could also say it's a bit of a dark art in terms of understanding how it works, in terms of where the kids are coming from, in terms of throughout the area, in terms of different types of education, Welsh and English, and also how it people move through the system. But education review these kind of applications, and they have said that there would be no significant impact and no requirement for contribution in this case.
Happy with that response, Councillor?
Yeah, just quickly, you didn't answer the one question with Persimmons. Are they targeting a specific clientele with these properties, or whoever wants to rent, lease, buy, whatever? Is that the position, or doesn't it matter for planning?
It is a commercial. Yeah. It's a commercial site, so obviously when they've developed it, they will be wishing to sell the properties and or lease. I'm not sure if they are going to be doing any leasing. Steve, do you know if
No, I mean, it's a private development.
Private
and Persimmon, you know, would almost always exclusively seek to market those, but they wouldn't be marketing to, you know, specific people or persons or groups. Ultimately, anyone who's interested in moving down here, and let's face it, why wouldn't they? You know, I'm sure this will attract quite a lot of interest from a range and mix of people, and I think that's the point with the type of properties. There is a range and mix of opportunities, both in terms of apartments and smaller units and larger units. So I think that's how it's been designed, and I imagine it would have a, you know, quite a diverse range of people would be interested in moving here.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Councillor, are you happy, satisfied?
Yes, Chair, thank you very much.
Okay, I will say I did have a question and a conversation with Andrew Thomas, the Director of Education, some months ago now about the very thing, and I was told that it is all worked out by formula, and obviously they have no objections, so we have to just rest on their professional judgment there. Anybody else wishing to make any comment or questions? I have some myself, but I'll let the committee come in first. No, I can't see any. Okay, yeah, I'll come back to you, Councillor Percy, because you're the local member, and I'll come back to you later. Yeah, I was myself, I was a little concerned about the foul water runoff, which I am very happy that Welsh Water have looked into it and made that declaration that although I had concerns, they do not have concerns. So once again, I do have to take on board their professional judgment on this. But I will be taking Steve's invitation up, and we'll be keeping a close eye afterwards should this application be approved today. I've got a question. It's mentioned in the report that some people thought that it was better suited to tourism. Now, I know, Steve, that you mentioned in the very beginning that this site has been vacant for a long time. We have actually tried to invite tourist type developments to this site, have we not?
That's my understanding. I mean, it's a council-owned site, so obviously there's been different marketing and different relationships that the estates team have built up. I think the original opportunities were put out to try and get a mixed-use site, but there was very little takers for it. The original, there was a scheme that members may recall that was originally being discussed and was out to pre-application consultation from Hale Homes, which included a small retail store, but that was as much as any degree of commercial activity was coming forward on the site. I think, as I say, the seafront as a whole, I think the direction of travel is changing in some respect. There's been different investment, both in terms of Lido, in terms of things like the surf school and other opportunities that estates are pursuing, and therefore I think, generally speaking, because we've sought and haven't received such interest, then I think this is the most appropriate site that delivers on the aspirations for the housing. And you'll note that even the 137 units isn't the 150 it was originally put forward for, but I do think that this is the right development now for the site within the context I've described.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. I just wanted to make committee members aware that, you know, we weren't just going for housing. We had tried for mixed type developments, tourism based, but if none come forward, then we're either left with a decision to leave the site as it is, which is not acceptable to many residents, or do some developments such as we've got before us today. There's one other question about the lighting on the two houses, I believe, that would be. I had a similar complaint from a resident down in Avondale, and a shade was affixed to the light, which actually stopped the vast majority of it coming down into it was only one house, and I'm pretty sure that something like this could be done even if the light remained. Is there anybody there that can actually answer that?
I mean, Simon might be able to advise in terms of how that will work, but to be honest, I think you're right. There are always mechanisms that can be done to prevent and reduce issues of light spill beyond site boundaries. But I think the critical thing in this case is that the applicant, Persimmon, do not have control over that. we as an authority have control.
Yeah.
So therefore, we as an authority may choose to either remove the lighting or it provides stuff ourselves as part of the sale mechanism, effectively. But that, you know, it would be inappropriate for us to place a condition requiring that when the applicant doesn't have control over that lighting. That's why what the report seeks to say is, we believe that source will be mitigated. However, even if it weren't mitigated, we still find it acceptable. The reason for that is, you know, if nothing happened and development went ahead and people living in that property suddenly said, oh, it's really bright, we can say, well, we have considered that, and therefore it's also within the report. So their due diligence, they could identify and understand that we have considered those issues already. I do anticipate the issue being addressed by our estates team, but the report looks at both eventualities just to make sure it's covered off for planning purposes.
Yeah, Simon is not in there. It's not for us to put a condition on it, but I do know that our local authority lights have been fitted with shades, so that could be done, Simon. Yeah.
Yes, Chair, you could put screens and diffusers, deflectors, you know, various different options on the lights to try and direct it away from the application site.
Yeah, and I'm aware perfectly that has worked in an area in my own ward. So I have Councillor Dennis Keogh indicating, and then at the moment, then I'll go back to Councillor Percy. Councillor Keogh?
Yes, thank you, Chair. When we were saying about the site in the beginning, I was part of the regeneration team then, when Gareth Nutt was the head of regeneration. And I know for a fact that site, we searched far and wide. I'm going to say Manchester, Birmingham. We went to the hotel chains and everything else to try and get that site occupied. But to no avail. But they said, believe it or not, is that Aberavon wasn't seasonal. And we said, yeah, come back here in January and tell us it's not seasonal. The people that are there, you know. But hey ho, I'm going to say that site has been empty for a long time. It's an eyesore, and I'm going to say, you know, that is appropriate for that site, and I welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keogh. It's always good to have somebody's experience of a site over a certain year. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Ros Davis, you indicating?
I appreciate that this is not a part of planning as such, but I'm just wondering, with the increase of interest in buying homes in Wales, I'm just wondering how many holiday homes will be bought. And it is a problem.
Yes, I do take your point, Councillor. However, you're quite correct. At this point in time, we are just allocating the use of the land under this application for a housing development. I believe that maybe Welsh Government would be the ones to lobby if you are worried, and I do take your point about too many second homes stroke holiday homes being bought. So unfortunately, I can't really take that on board for today's meeting. Okay. Anybody else?
Chair, can I have a comment briefly?
Of course, yes, yeah.
I mean, it is an interesting point Councillor Davis has raised. I mean, you're absolutely right, Chair. For the purpose of this application, it isn't something that we can take account of. And you know, given where it is possible it might attract some people doing what you say. The issue, we don't have an issue with that, you know, with people buying up second homes and with holiday homes. We don't have a particularly big issue in and around this area based upon our understanding of the issue. But it doesn't mean it won't increase in certain areas. But there has been some recent Welsh Government research and some consultations being undertaken about this very issue, which does identify that it is a potentially complex issue that has in certain areas of Wales, such as Snowdonia in particular. Swansea doesn't have an issue except in the Gower, where there's a big issue, and there are other parts of Pembrokeshire and different parts of Wales that clearly do have an issue, and it does have an impact in terms of you know, community cohesion, in terms of the availability of housing to serve the local communities, etc., etc. There's a lot of issues. It is something that's known, the research being undertaken, and I do anticipate the Welsh Government introducing some degree of control at some point in the future. So you will hear about that in due course, because it is an interesting point. I don't think we are likely to be an area that it's a significant one at present, but who's to say when things may not change, particularly, I say, in areas such as this that are increasingly attractive for people to buy up second homes or to have Airbnbs or houses to let, etc. But for the purpose of this application, as the chair said, it's not something that would ultimately determine the application before us. Thank you, Chair.
But thanks for your question, Councillor Davis. It's very pertinent, yes. I don't see anybody else at the moment, so I'm going to go back to Councillor Sean Percy, who is the local member, as well as being Vice Chair of the committee. Councillor?
Thank you, Chair, and I'm glad I let other members speak, because I've got quite a lot to say, I suppose, and some of the things have been picked up by other members, so
Okay.
I thank them for doing that. And while it's fresh in my mind, I do want to pick up on the comment Ros had just made about second homes. I think that is something we've got to really, keep a close eye on.
Yeah.
It's something I've noticed. My ward is Sandfleas East on the seafront. You can go on and look at Airbnbs, and there are a few popping up and more popping up in the area. And it's something I've certainly got my eye on, because there is pressure on housing locally, and we do really need to watch that. So thanks for raising that, Ros, and it's something that's on our minds. So yeah, in terms of this particular application, this particular site, it's been ongoing for some time now, trying to find developers and almost coming to planning and everything else. And I've received a lot of representations from residents in favour and objections to the proposed development as well. Now, I've got to sort of say that I do share some of the concerns raised by members of the public. I think, in particular, some of the concerns around the car park and the loss of that are very valid. The car park's used by visitors to the beach, the football club, it's pick up, drop off for the school. Now, obviously, the issue with that is that, the site is allocated as a housing site, and, in the development plan, and that doesn't protect the car park. And the report acknowledges that, and there's very little sort of I can do legitimately, I guess, under the planning process to object on that basis, given that, as Steve has said, the principle of housing development has sort of already been, accepted on the site. But if you don't mind, Chair, I just want to give a little bit of background for those who may sort of be watching this in terms of, the allocation of the site. It's been allocated for housing for a significant period of time. I can remember myself, back in the 2000s, there being some sort of disquiet about it, particularly the land at the rear of Towing School. This was in the old unitary development plan and was carried over into the local development plan as a housing site. And of course, that was adopted in 2016 before I was a member of this authority, and other members as well here today. But I think it's worth noting, certainly to members of the public, the importance of these development plans and feeding into them, because a lot of the objections that we've had relate to the principle of the development and against the principle of housing on the site. And that is something that's already been decided, and the opportunity is actually going to come up again when we review the development plan for members of the public to feed into that process. And I just think this application highlights the importance of people taking part in that process, because they will get an opportunity to say, I don't think housing is appropriate for this site, or I think this is appropriate, or that, or this number, or this particular facility is serving a particular purpose. So I kind of want to highlight that at the moment, because we're just starting the process of reviewing the development plan. And I will certainly be guiding residents through that process and how they can get involved. But this is the key example as to why it's important, because this was decided a long, long time ago that housing was appropriate for this site, and we are effectively bound by that overarching principle at the moment. But I also got to say, sort of in terms of how we go forward with, any issues that do arise from this development, I've been working with officers, of course, to improve access to Aberafon Beach, as a local member, and the chair will know that I've tried and so far failed to improve the bus service, which was, quite a difficult task, and I'm going to be continuing with that to try and get a regular bus service to the seafront. And of course, there's potential for other things like park and ride facilities, which I think is probably the biggest key to solving the parking and access issues to Aberavon Beach at peak times. And I think it's important, you know, for me as a local member to acknowledge that I'm not dismissing those concerns and those issues, and I'm very much aware that there is pressure on residential streets. There's difficulty accessing the beach at busy times, and there's more for us to do on that. And I don't think losing this car park is the end of the world. I think it will cause some challenges, but we can work around it, and we can deal with it, and that's certainly what I'll be doing. And on a similar vein, there's some of the consultation responses sort of refer to sort of housing on this site will be sort of halt any future development of the seafront and sort of, you know, draw a line under the seafront's potential. And I don't agree with that at all. You know, we've got a number of identified sites on the promenade for food and drink. There's previously approved but not built, you know, applications for leisure developments alongside the cinema. So there's a lot more potential on the seafront, and I don't think this site is going to stop any of that. Certainly, you know, as local members, we are all very keen to develop more facilities, toilet facilities, etc. on the east side of the beach as well. And obviously, for a bit of balance, you know, I said I've had residents contact me with, you know, in support as well, and particularly, you know, a lot of residents who want to move house, want to move into a new build house, or want to move into a larger house, but don't want to leave the area. And the amount of messages I've had, actually, people saying, well, you know, how can I register my interest? How can I do this? How can I do that? And it's been heartening actually to see the amount of local people that are interested in that side of things, and actually want to stay in the area as well. So it is worth me flagging that up. But the flip side to that is the social housing element. And I've got to say, for my own conscience, I am disappointed that the previous administration bound this development not to have a contribution. I totally understand the commitment to not put social housing on the site itself, but for there to be no off-site contribution is disappointing. There's a lot of pressure on social housing, and I'm not particularly happy in sort of being in this position as a local member where a significant development comes forward without a contribution to social housing. So I do have to flag that up, and it's a shame that there's nothing we can really do about that at the moment. So a couple of other tiny things to flag up, and one is school places, which one of the other members, I think Councillor Hunt, picked up. It's something I was a little surprised in the report to see education say there would be no significant impact. You know, I'm aware of pressure on school places in the area, residents contacting me struggling to get places. So, you know, I'm mindful, of course, you know, the chair's mentioned there's formulas and calculations, and this development's not all going to happen overnight. It's going to be in phases over a period of time as well. But I'm certainly going to be picking this up with education, because I can't quite see how this is going to work in my head yet. So I need some sort of further assurances from them that they are planning appropriately for school places. And then the very last point is renewable energy, and I think Councillor Mason picked this up about the EV charging points, etc. Now, I'm glad that, you know, following negotiations, we've secured some limited solar panels and EV charging, and I think I'm right in saying that that did not form part of the original application at all. But I am a bit disappointed that it's only gone this far. I appreciate Steve's comment on, you know, how far we can push it in the planning process. But you'd like to think in 2021 that the developer would want to go further than 16% EV charging points, and you know, no solar PV on the private homes either. It's disappointing, but I totally understand that, you know, there's a limit to what we can currently require under the planning process. So thanks for allowing my me to get these things off my chest, Chair. I will be supporting this application, but with the reservations that I've outlined in my address to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. And as a local member, I do understand the predicament sometimes between what residents want and what the rules or the process allows. It doesn't always match up like a jigsaw, and I do understand, and I'll take on board everything you've said about the solar panels, the social housing and the schools placements as well, and even to a certain extent parking. However, to quote another member of this council, we are where we are, and we'll go forward with this application now. So nobody is actually registering to speak at the moment. No, does anybody wish to speak? No. Okay, therefore then we've had quite a lot of debate so far, lots of members saying their points of view. I will take you to the recommendations on page 44. That is to approve this application with the conditions and taking into account the amendment sheet as well. So do I have someone to move that recommendation?
Happy to move, Chair.
Councillor Hunt, thank you. Anybody to second?
Happy to second, Chair.
Councillor Mason, thank you. There we are. Tammy, can I call on you now then to take the members of the committee through another roll call. To say that they've been present throughout the whole of the meeting and that they didn't drop out electronically and miss anything. And then B, which way they would like to vote on this application.
Yes, certainly, Chair. Thank you. I'll start with yourself. Were you present for the whole of this application item, and how do you wish to vote?
I have been present for the whole application and I wish to vote in favour of the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. Same questions, please, to Vice Chair, Councillor Sean Percy.
Yes, I've been present for the whole item, Tammy, and I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. And the same questions again to the following councillors. Dennis Keogh.
Thank you, Tammy. I did drop out briefly at the end of the summing up by Chair, but I soon came back in, but I approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ros Davis.
I have been present for the whole item and I'm voting for the recommendation. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch. Councillor Rydian Maison.
Yes, I've been present for the whole item, Tammy, and I will be voting for the application.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Hunt, please.
Yes, Tammy, I've been here for the whole item and I am in favour of the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Arwyn Woolcock.
Yes, Chair, I confirm that I've been present for the entire agenda item and I'm voting for the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Suzanne Renkes.
So I missed the first 7 minutes of the meeting due to connection problems. I have read the papers in advance, so I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to vote or not.
Yes, Councillor, I believe that'll be fine.
Yes, that's fine. Nothing was said that wasn't in the reports and the papers, so that's fine.
I vote to approve.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mark Prothero.
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, I confirm I was present for the whole presentation and for the whole meeting. My video dropped out a couple of times, but I was still here listening, and I will be voting for the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Rachel Taylor, please.
Thank you, Tammy. Yeah, I can confirm I've been here for the entire item and I will be voting in favour of the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I check I haven't missed anybody off that at all? No, there we are, Chair. That application has been approved.
Thank you very much, Tammy, and thank you, members of the committee. Okay, then. So now we'll move on then to item 6. I'll just get the new page. Just a second. There we are. Okay, this is application for decision today, P 2021/0567. Change of use from a dwelling class C3 to a children's home class C2 at 4 Dalrymple Street, Aberavon, Port Talbot. I will now go to Steve Ball, who can take the members of the committee through this report, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have the presentation.
Yes, I can see the presentation, but we have had it electronically as well.
Of course. Right. Thank you very much. Anyway, so as the Chair said, this is an application 2021-0567. It's an application for number 4 Dalrymple Street in Aberravon. It is a change of use from a C3 dwelling house to a children or small children's home, which is under youth class C2. So an applicant is the Bespoke Care Group Limited. The actual application site is shown on the plan in front of you, or the 2 plans in front of you, which just shows it's just a mid-terrace property just off St Mary Street. As the report says on page 55, this application has been called in on request from Councillor Stephanie Lynch, who's here today and will address members after myself. Having regard to the concerns locally about the proposal potentially creating antisocial behaviour and any potential effect on highway and pedestrian safety by virtue of limited parking provision. And as the report says, we did bring that forward at the call-in panel, and we agreed it should come on those grounds. The application was also due to be discussed on the 10th of August when I was on annual leave, as you'll remember, but it was deferred then largely on the basis that there was some discussion about one of the other local ward members wanted the opportunity to address members. The report that is in front of you and I'll be presenting today is exactly the same as it was presented identified before you 3 weeks ago, other than one minor typographical error which Kerry managed to pick up in my report. Thank you, Kerry. So it is a terrace residential property at number 4 Dalrymple Street. It is actually a property that's been occupied for many years as a house of multiple occupation, which members will be more than aware of what a house of multiple occupation is. It isn't actually authorised as a Class C4 property. It's one that was in use for many years as such. It is an application to change it, therefore, from the use class C3, which is its authorised use, to a small children's home. Page 56 of the report, but also the plans in front of you on the presentation identify the existing property. So it is an existing house, living room, dining room, kitchen, ground floor. Actually, that's the proposed one. Sorry, three bedrooms at the top, and that's to change effectively to exactly the same, but one of the bedrooms becomes an office for the effectively the carers who will be within the property, and it will have 2 bedrooms within that property. So it is a small care home. There will be 4 staff, and the applicants confirmed that 2 staff will be present at any one time within this property. There have, in addition to Councillor Lynch's representations, there have been 7 representations received, and they're effectively concerned in terms of relationship with property, their own properties, the fact that they think, a children's home could have adverse impact both in terms of noise and disturbance or congestion, but also concern about the people or the children who would be occupying this property and how that could affect the local area in terms of potential antisocial behaviour, etc., which obviously will be considered shortly in the report. Just for context, the property is identified in the property on the area in front of you, which shows that it is a mid-terrace property, parking on the street, and there's also a garage at the rear. Oops, excuse me. So in terms of the principal development, this is a residential use. It is not a Class C3 residential use, but it is still a residential use. This is a property within settlement limits, and therefore the actual principle of this kind of accommodation is acceptable in principle. Excuse me. There are concerns, as I've said, about the nature of the use itself in terms of the care of children resident of the property, and I say with staff present, but it is a residential use. So in terms of land use planning, there is not considered to be any objection to the same. That is particularly notable as well that the property has been in use as a house multiple occupation, I say for many years, which is also a residential use, albeit now would not be a C3 use, but for the same kind of reasons. In principle, such uses are acceptable, subject to not having any adverse impacts arising as a consequence from them. One of the things that has obviously been raised is who will be occupying the property, and planning is not about who occupies property. As I say, it is about the land use planning side of things, and this will still be a residential property. There'll be 2 children in care, which would be restricted by condition to no more than 2 children, with staff present on site at all times. Now, to all intents and purposes, that is just very similar to a residential property. It's very similar to a single household with people on site, but it does require plan permission because our interpretation of case law is such that when you don't have someone permanently residing on site to provide that level of care for a child, in other words, someone like a quasi parent, then it requires planning. but that doesn't make it unacceptable. And to all intents and purposes, the nature of this occupation and the residential use is not considered to be demonstrably different to residential use under C3, to the extent that we're more than happy and do not consider to be any justifiable objection to the principle of this development. In terms of visual amenity, there are no changes to the building such that there would be no adverse impact in that consequence. And similarly, in terms of residential amenity, there's no changes made to the property. So the only issues to consider really are the concerns locally about, could this use create additional noise and disturbance over what is currently enjoyed on site? And we would say, I think that's most unlikely, and certainly not to the extent that would justify a refusal on the basis that this was the intensity of use could even reduce from what was there before from a house multiple occupation, insofar as there will only be 2 occupants, albeit with staff, compared to the 3 bedrooms that there were before. House multiple occupation, even though that in itself, as members will know, is usually acceptable, can potentially have greater impact, but with staff being present on this site, 2 at any one time, they would be there to control and ensure that this use does not have any such unacceptable impact. So within that regard, even with comings and goings of staff, we're satisfied there wouldn't be any materially different impacts arising from this proposal compared to its use as a dwelling, and certainly not to the extent that we should be refusing application on such grounds. Similarly, in terms of parking and access requirements, this is an existing residential use. It would normally, under our parking standard, require 3 off-street parking spaces, and effectively the proposal, even including the staff requirement, wouldn't have any additional parking requirement over and above the existing use. There is a large garage access off the rear lane, and we do feel it's appropriate to require that to be retained and available for parking of vehicles, as the applicant has said, or potentially, should they choose to demolish that garage, they could come up with an alternative parking scheme at the rear. A condition is proposed to that effect, which allows for either of those eventualities to be controlled by that condition. And as I say, the other matters raised by residents effectively are not really material planning considerations. We do understand that when proposals come forward in terms of care, that some concerns may be raised locally about issues in terms of community cohesion and how it could impact upon local character. But those kind of impacts arising from a single property like this, or even if there were more than one, are unlikely to be material to the extent of justifying refusal of planning. It's in that regard, it's probably not dissimilar to an HMO kind of issue. If you start getting lots of these things in small parts of a site or small parts of an area, cumulatively it could start to have impacts, but certainly arising from this application does not consider to be any issues in terms of principle or the impacts arising from the development. And on that basis, Chair, the recommendation on page 61 is to approve this application subject to conditions listed therein. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. That's fantastic. Right, okay. I'm going to call on the local member to speak first on this. This was brought, her application for it to come to a call-in panel and then to committee was received. And I do have sympathy with local members who are experiencing challenging remarks from residents. And I felt that even though I'm quite happy with Mr. Ball's recommendation, I was more than happy to bring this to committee to help the local councillor perhaps explain the difficulties. So I will call on Councillor Stephanie Lynch, who's the local member now, please.
Hi, yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for accepting my request on the 14th for this application. So I requested this, quite like the chair said, to have the opportunity for some of the concerns that residents have brought to me to be articulated to planning committee, and I'm also glad that conditions have been added in terms of parking and staff being there. Residents responded to the consultation on the June the 7th, expressing concerns for the potential increase in antisocial behaviour. Residents have also asked me to express that although only neighbouring properties were consulted at the time, they would have preferred that the street was consulted due to the potential impact on parking and the noise disturbances not potentially just affecting the neighbouring properties. I have received concerns over parking in the street aside from this coming to planning committee and the potential issues that may arise now in terms of staff changeovers and the needs for it to be considered, and especially in relation to a nearby chip shop. Although officers in the report have noted that the property has been utilised as a HMO historically, residents feel it is really crucial to express that this has a different impact than a children's home, owing to the fact that essentially it will house children for a start instead of adults, and they come from different situations. Residents don't agree that HMOs and this children homes are the same in principle, so I think that is really key to their argument as well. Residents would also like to express that there is already a number of HMOs in the area, and although I understand that this isn't a planning committee point, it is something that they would like me to express today, and the potential risk of the increase in antisocial behaviour and the difficulties it could result in social cohesion should be taken seriously. According to the Welsh Government Welsh Index on Multiple Deprivation of 2019, this particular street is directly in the middle of the highest level of deprivation that's available on that scale. So this scale includes factors such as income, community safety and housing, which is all going to be impacted if this planning goes ahead. So that's what the residents would like me to express today. I hope I've explained everything in a proper way on their behalf, and again, thank you for allowing me to speak today.
No problem, Councillor. It is sometimes the role of the local councillor to bring things to committee, to give them a good airing so that members can see what is actually going on. I will come back to you at the end of the debate should the need arise if you wish to speak again, okay? Members of the committee, does anybody have a question or have a comment to make regarding this application? Councillor Hunt, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was wondering if Mr. Ball was going to respond first, because a number of points that the local member has raised there with HMOs, and as you know, we've dealt with quite a number of HMOs. I wasn't quite sure that this fell into that category as explained, but I think Mr. Ball and his team, perhaps if he addresses what the local member has said, maybe I won't need to repeat some of the points.
Right. Okay.
I think that would be more appropriate. Okay. With your permission,
no problem.
of course. Thank
yeah, and as I say, I just wanted to know what members had as regards questions, and then perhaps go back to Steve. So, Steve, in order to have duplicate questions, could you please address Councillor Lynch's comments regarding HMOs, antisocial behaviour? I'm trying to think. Historically different, the fact that it's different according to residents, please.
Of course, thank you. I'll also address the first matter she raised insofar as the residents would have preferred additional consultation to be undertaken with the street.
Yeah.
Just to emphasise that, we undertake what's required in terms of statutory consultation, and therefore it's very difficult for individual applications to start going out because we have to be seen to be consistent. But I think the important thing for this one is we have received 7 representations. We have received it from yourself, Councillor Lynch, in terms of a local representation from the ward member. So it is not an application that's gone quiet and under the radar, but even if it had, we've still done what we're statutorily required to do. It is always very difficult to satisfy everyone in that regard, and we do appreciate some people will often say, but I didn't know about it. But I think that's where ward members such as yourself do a great job in making sure the locals are aware of these things, and I've always encouraged a number of different members, and I know you particularly like this, as does Councillor Hunt, in terms of use of social media for these kind of platforms, to make sure people are aware, so they can't say I didn't know about it, the council didn't tell me. But in this case, the representations have been made and have been considered. The report covers most things, but I think in terms of stuff you've raised, I think you've said that the residents feel that this is different to a house of multiple occupation, so it's not the same in principle. I would accept that. They are different uses. I mean, a house of multiple occupation is a Class C4 use, and a children's home in this case is a Class C2 use. What the report doesn't say is that they're the same, so it's no problem. what it says is that they are both residential uses in principle, and both are acceptable, provided the assessments of impacts arising from it are acceptable. So the fact that it has been used as an HMO has been used not to justify, but to appreciate that there is not a material difference in terms of noise and disturbance, for example, or potentially issues in antisocial behaviour of concerns that are raised from HMOs. They're not dissimilar, but they would have potentially different impact, but that doesn't make them unacceptable in that regard. And similarly, even if there's a number of different HMOs in the area, that wouldn't mean that this use would be unacceptable. If the evidence was that residential class C3 uses were being dominated to the extent that there's loads and loads of different types of small and larger care homes and HMOs all within an area, then issues of social and community cohesion could come into play. And it's the emphasis on the word could. But I'm certainly not aware of any evidence in and around this area or in this street to indicate that that is at any degree of a level that would be likely to result in any justification on those grounds for refusing on the principle. And that's why the recommendation is to approve in that regard. You also talked about the area being within the centre of the area of highest level of deprivation in 2019, and you know, I don't have the evidence before me, but I have no doubt about what you're saying. But again, those kind of things can come into the mix when you're looking at the overall issue of context about the nature of uses within an area, like I've just talked about in terms of HMOs, C2, C3. But just because it's in an area of deprivation doesn't make it unacceptable in principle. What we have to do is consider this specific particular application to identify, is it acceptable in principle? Will it have any unacceptable impacts? And that's what we've sought to do, and that's why the recommendation is to approve. I believe that's answered most of those questions, but Councillor Hunt or Councillor Lynch or anyone else, if there's any issues you want clarified or any other further questions, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. I'll go back to Councillor Hunt first, because I do intend to go back to Councillor Lynch right at the very end, just if anything has been raised that she wants to emphasise. So, Councillor Hunt, you've had some of the questions asked. Have you got subsequent questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. That clears up a lot, and
Lovely.
It's important for Mr. Ball to address those points, because some of them were the points I might have stumbled upon.
Okay.
Can I ask Simon a question as well in relationship to this application? I know we have previously monitoring of the situation there for potential antisocial behaviour and so forth. I do appreciate antisocial behaviour would come under the police jurisdiction, but as an environmental team, we also have some ways of monitoring, as we have done in other parts of the county borough. So just that's a little question to him. And one thing for you, Chair, really, is that this application, as Mr. Ball quite rightly explained, he was off on holidays and he's come back to us now. Wasn't Councillor Nigel Hunt put a number of concerns and questions? I don't see them in the report. And obviously, I'm not sure why he's not here today, maybe on holidays. But I just wondered, has his potential observations, questions been addressed? Because I don't find them in the report either. So those are just a couple of points I wanted to mention. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to take them in the order that you mentioned them, and I'm going to ask Simon Evans, who's the Environmental Health Officer, if he could comment on your questions regarding monitoring.
Thank you, Chair. Couldn't get the phone off mute for a moment then. Yes, to pick up Councillor Hunt's points, yeah, you are correct. Antisocial behaviour as such in the street would be picked up by the police in the first instance, but we do work very closely with the police, and with regards to the nature of the disturbance, if it is sourced from within the property itself, then obviously those become things where environmental health would be involved in. We don't go out routinely actively monitoring from a lot of properties of a similar nature to this. We do rely on members of the public bringing them to our attention when it's occurring, and then obviously investigating fully when that's brought to our attention. With regards to it, just to give a little bit of context, I had a bit of a look at the history of the property. Again, I appreciate everything with regards that the ward member said about it being a not a HMO, but just to give a context when it has been used as one. We did have some ASB issues in and around the property back in 2013. The property at the time was managed by a particularly poor managing agent, and as soon as someone else was in charge of the property, the issues were resolved very quickly. It was predominantly noise within the property being heard in the two properties either side. Now, for that kind of antisocial behaviour in this particular application, it should be better controlled because there's going to be a member of staff, a supervisor, for want of a better expression, on site 24 hours a day. So that does make it different to being the former HMO use, and I would hope that it would be better controlled than perhaps it would have been if it had been still a HMO use.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Councillor Hunt, sorry, does that address your monitoring issue? Yep.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, turning now to your question to me and possibly Mr. Ball as well. Yes, at the last planning meeting, Councillor Hunt raised an issue just shortly before it to say that he hadn't been carbon copied into a section of emails, and especially the response to the result of the call-in. However, I am to understand that I haven't received any correspondence from Councillor Hunt since then. I'm going to turn to Mr. Ball. Mr. Ball, have you received anything from Councillor Hunt regarding questions or concerns?
No, I mean, as I advised you prior to the meeting, I mean, I've had nothing back from Councillor Hunt. So what I actually did to make sure that Councillor Hunt didn't feel that he was excluded in any respect was when the report was publicised, I actually sent an email to the local ward members, including Councillor Lynch, who's here today, to advise that I have not received any further comments, that the report was being published, but the opportunity still exists to provide any representations by close of play Friday, so I could include those on an amendment sheet, and members will have those. I also haven't received no further representations after that email. I then also sent the presentation and amendment sheet around to all members, as you'll know, but I also copied in the local board members again to that presentation and amendment sheet again, so Councillor Hunt was aware of what we had, and I still haven't had anything further back from him. So regrettably, and he's not here today, so I don't have any specific comments that Councillor Nigel Hunt has made on this application to address. I can only assume that they would be the same kind of concerns that Councillor Lynch has put forward on behalf of the community and that we've addressed in my presentation and my responses to questions. I'm certainly not aware of any other issues that he would have raised that haven't been raised by Councillor Lynch on the committee's behalf. Chair.
Councillor Hunt, clear?
Very much so. Thank you, Chair. I think
it's
important just to mention that.
Yeah, I must say I'm a little disappointed myself, to be honest with you. We did defer this item just solely so Councillor Hunt could get up to speed, as he hadn't been carbon copied in, and it is disappointing that he is not here today, but we can only do what we can do. I think Mr. Ball has done everything possible to include him, and he had every opportunity to be here this morning. So I do take on board your points. Okay then, anybody else have questions?
Chair, can I just, I literally have just received an email.
Yeah, so have I.
That just says, what time is the committee meeting?
From Councillor Hunt.
From Councillor Hunt. So I'm not sure, I mean, obviously he should
I think
be
that'll
aware
have
of that.
to be dealt with after the meeting now, Councillor. I think we advertise these meetings. Everybody knows there's a schedule. You can look it up at any time.
I'd like to confirm, Chair, if it's okay with you, that Councillor Nigel Hunt was sent an invitation the same time as Councillor Stephanie.
I am very
Lynch,
grateful to you. I'm very grateful for that information.
I mean, would you like us to try and invite him to the meeting? now, or is it too late?
No, I'm afraid I don't think that we could have done any more. I'm going to ask Craig Griffiths what he feels. Craig.
Apologies, Chair. Yes, I think from the perspective, if opportunities are presented to the members where they've had an opportunity to make representations by a certain time, invites have been forwarded, then you're under no obligation at this stage for any sort of further deferral of matters to be considered.
That's fine. I mean, I'm almost at the point of going to recommendation now, so I don't feel that we can do any more. If nobody else has any questions, I'm going to call back to Councillor Lynch for anything that she may wish to add. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, no more than what I've already said, and at least, you know, residents have been represented. So,
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Councillor. Therefore, then I'm going to take you to. I've written it down here. The recommendations for this application are on page 61, and it is to approve with conditions. There's only 4, I believe. Do I have a proposer?
Move, Chair.
Is that Councillor Hunt? Yeah. Seconded by? Anybody?
Second that.
Rose Davis, lovely. Thank you very much. Tammy, if you will take the voting members of the committee through the questions again. Have they been here for the whole item, and which way do they wish to vote?
Certainly, Chair. I'll start with yourself. Have you been present for the whole of this item, and how do you wish to vote?
Yes, I have been present for the whole of the item, and I wish to vote in favour of the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Same for Councillor Sean Percy, the Vice Chair, please.
Yes, thank you, Tammy. I've been present for the whole item, and I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor. Same questions. Have you been present for the whole item, and how do you wish to vote for the following members of the committee? Councillor Dennis Keogh.
I have been present for the entire article, and I'll be voting for.
Thank you. Councillor Rose Davis.
I've been present for the whole item, and I'm voting in favour of the recommendation.
Diolch. Councillor Rydian Mason.
Yes, I've been present for the whole agenda item, Tammy, and I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Hunt.
I've also been here for the whole item, and I've been voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Arwyn Woolcock.
Yes, Chair, confirm that I've been present for the whole agenda item, voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Suzanne Renkes.
Yes, I've been here for the whole of the item, and I vote for.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Prothero.
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, confirm I've been here for the whole agenda item, and I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Rachel Taylor, please.
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, I've been here for the entire item, and I will vote for the recommendation.
Thank you. Chair, that is unanimous in favour of the application.
That's lovely. So that is approved. Thank you very much, Tammy. Moving swiftly along to application 7 on our agenda today is application, oh God, I have to enlarge it, my eyes, dear me. P2021-0584. A change of use of the first and second floors from offices to emergency refuge accommodation at 49 Talbot Road, Port Talbot. Before I ask Mr. Ball to take us through the application, I do believe the local member is here, so welcome for this item, Councillor Freegard, and I will be coming to you first before the debate, and I shall come back to you as well at the end of the debate, as I did with Councillor Lynch. So, Mr. Ball, if you take the committee through this report, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you said, the application on the screen, it is for number 49 Talbot Road. It's a change use of the upper floors, first and second floors, from existing offices to emergency refuge accommodation. The application has been brought before members largely because we have had some engagement with local members and aware of some representations being made locally, and we decided as officers to bring this forward to committee. So we haven't had a formal request to bring it forward, but we felt it was appropriate to do so. it is notable as well, as you said, Councillor Freeguard's here to put forward representations. Members, although it's not on an amendment sheet formally, members, I believe, were also copied into an email from Councillor Cypher-Ackerman, I think it was last night or overnight, in which he's stated that he hasn't or isn't attending today. He's read through the report, and while I think had some initial reservations, he's satisfied with the level of control and conditions placed within the report. But I'll go through those shortly. But,
and then the third member of the ward is a member of the planning committee anyway, so that's fine.
Indeed, how could I leave Councillor Keogh out? But I'll leave him to say his piece, as I'm sure he will. So the application site itself is shown on the red line boundary. It's a single block within the site. There's no external space associated with it, no on-street or off-street parking associated with it within the red line boundary, albeit there is on-street parking and some parking in the side street between the properties. This is the application site in terms of the existing elevation and floor plans. And say there's commercial use of the ground floor. The application itself is just relating to the upper floors, the first floor and the second floor of this unit. And as you'll see from this screen and the one I've zoomed in on, the application shows a subdivision of those upper floors into what is classed as emergency accommodation. It's all emergency refuge accommodation. So there are 12 individual units, 7 units in the laundry room and a separate toilet on the first floor, and a further 5 units along with storage on the second floor. Each of these rooms effectively are kind of small, you could call them studio accommodation, so that they are effectively allowing someone to live in there with a bed, kitchenette, ensuite and space for sitting out at the table, etc. So they are everything's required for overnight or temporary short stay accommodation. And the intention of this applicant is for the accommodation to accommodate vulnerable individuals seeking emergency and temporary refuge. The applicants also confirmed it will be managed by the same registered charity who intend to occupy the ground floor offices, and that charity provide counselling and welfare support for vulnerable individuals who be using such accommodation. The application emphasises that this is proposed for limited stays of only a couple of nights, and indeed the limited floor space I've referred to, you can see on the street on the slide in front of you, indicates that it is a limited temporary solution related to homelessness of individuals, guiding and steering them to look for more permanent accommodation elsewhere in association with local authority, housing associations, support networks, etc. That is important, and I'll go into that in terms of the principle shortly. As the report says, there have been 8 number of representations received, and that they are raising concerns largely, and not dissimilar to the last application we dealt with, but on a different level, the concerns about the people who will be occupying these kind of units, about the potential for increasing crime and drug use and impact on the area as a consequence. And effectively saying that there's other uses such as these, such as the YMCA nearby. So why do we need it? But in terms of the principal development, which I go to next, I mean, again, this is a proposal within settlement limits. This is a residential use, albeit small units within a larger block. So the actual principle of residential use such as this is appropriate in terms of its settlement limit location. We obviously do need to consider whether there's any adverse impacts as a consequence. But what I said to the chair in our briefing was, at the time of drafting this report, literally as I came back from holiday, there was a letter in my inbox which had been forwarded, which was the letter from Julie James, the Minister for Climate Change. And within that letter, it was actually strongly emphasising the role of Welsh local authorities and Welsh Government in terms of supporting people experiencing homelessness and ensuring they have access to this kind of accommodation, part of an inclusive approach. And it is part of their recently published programme for government, the commitment to fundily reform homelessness services to focus on prevention and rapid rehousing. It was pertinent that came through because these are all the issues that we were considering, but we didn't necessarily have the wording to support it, to help reinforce to members how important this kind of accommodation is as part of a wider strategic programme, effectively, to ensure there is active and essential support for homelessness. This letter quite clearly puts into words the emphasis that Welsh Government and, as a consequence, local authorities are and should be giving to the need for considering, you know, temporary solutions for homelessness and rapid rehousing of people affected. And on that basis, you know, I think that not only do we not think there's any issues as a consequence of this nature of use, but we think it's actively and strongly supported. And it is a land use planning issue. As I've said many times on these things, it's not about who occupies these things, it's a land use planning. Is it acceptable in principle? And if there are any issues arising as a consequence, can they be managed to the extent that it's acceptable? Albeit noting, as I say, there are other regulatory processes involved in such uses as well, a bit similar to what Simon was talking about in the previous application. But what I certainly, as the DM manager, sought to achieve on this application was to get the assurances for you as members that this isn't just going to be individual units that are left to their own devices. Because I think if there were 12 individual units with people going in and there was no degree of on-site control and regulation of that, I certainly understood that is more likely to lead to a situation where the concerns of local residents could come to fruition, and then need to be picked up by other regulators. So what we've had as part of this application is probably more detail than we were going to seek immediately, because we would have controlled by condition, but a fully detailed management plan for emergency refuge accommodation. And there's a link within the report if you haven't read it. And it does detail how effectively the charity would occupy the ground floor offices, and they would provide that floating support. They would provide, you know, a 24-hour warden presence as part of their staffing, 24-hour staffing project. And it's clear procedures in place about how they would manage people coming to and using and vacating and occupying these premises. And I think subject to the condition that's being proposed, which effectively requires it only to be occupied as emergency accommodation in accordance with that management plan, i.e. managed by the people on the ground floor, we are more than happy that degree of on-site presence would ensure that any issues that could arise would be managed at source, to the extent that you know, not only do we agree with the principle, but we feel that is the most appropriate way forward for this, in actually providing a much valued and needed nature and type of accommodation to satisfy the Welsh Government and local authority aspirations for homelessness and rapid rehousing of those persons affected. Other matters raised in terms of report visual amenity, that there aren't any external alterations proposed to the building, such that there will be no change. Similarly, issues in terms of habitable room windows and the relationships between this proposal are considered to be the same as before, effectively, without having any adverse impacts. And similarly, in terms of noise and disturbance, there wouldn't be any dissimilar consideration in terms of any other residential use that would be acceptable in principle on this site. Parking and access, as I said before, this is a site, and if I just show the photos briefly, this is a building as it is now. They've been doing some work to that building. You'll see that there's the street on the side. You've got on-street parking, excuse me, and again, this is the building as you can see it here in terms of the on-street presence, and also looking from the rear. You know, there isn't any on-site parking, but what the report effectively says is, and only looking at the upper floors because it only relates to the upper floors, very much in summary, this proposed nature use, even for normal residential, wouldn't have a greater parking requirement than the offices that is its authorised use, and therefore there can be no objection on parking or highway safety grounds as a consequence. But irrespective of that, the report also notes that this is a very sustainable location. It's on bus routes. It's close to the town centre and to the trains, and therefore not only would you normally have to reduce parking requirements in any respect for the uses, but ultimately this type of accommodation is also most unlikely to be accommodating people other than the staff of the ground floor, which is different outside of this application, is unlikely to be attracting people who would have vehicles in any respect. So both of those issues together are such that there aren't any adverse comments from highways, and there's no adverse comments from us in terms of the impact on highway and pedestrian safety. Finally, there's a small contribution for open space required because it is a residential redevelopment. Those matters will be covered by a legal agreement.
Yep.
And as a consequence, again, the recommendation subject to that legal agreement on page 70 is that plan permission should be granted subject to legal agreement and the conditions listed therein. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Okay, I will call now on Councillor Freegard, visitor to this committee, local member, to address. Councillor Freegard.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies, I've been away for the last 2 weeks, so I've sort of come into this cold this morning, really. But thank you for allowing me to speak.
No problem.
I've got a number of questions, but I wondered if I may ask my first question, because depending on that answer, I may not have quite as many following up questions.
Yeah, quite happy to do it that way, thanks.
I wondered if Mr. Ball could give us detail on the actual charity that's going to be running this, because I'm a bit confused as to the different charities. There's the Woolwich downstairs, I believe, but there's talk about DGP Properties actually owning this, and so I'm a bit confused about what charity is actually going to be the provider for all this.
Mr. Ball?
Right, thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm not sure, Councillor Freegard, if you've read in detail the management plan for the accommodation.
I have.
I mean, I think the most important thing really is, from a planning perspective, it doesn't actually matter which charity. All it matters is that it is managed in accordance with the management plan that identifies how they will manage it. So my understanding is it could well be the Woolwich that you talked about, because they are present on the site, but I don't know that, and it's not something, it would be inappropriate for us to be placing restrictions saying it shall only be one charity. It's more about this has obviously been this management plan has been worked up by the planning consultant in association with that charity who intend to occupy and operate the facility effectively. So therefore, irrespective of who they are, if it was the Woolwich and then 6 months later a different charity came in and they managed it exactly the same, there's no material difference in planning terms who it is, as long as they do what it says within the management plan, if that makes sense.
Right, okay, I have a number of questions now then, Mr. Ball, and I have some concerns about it, because I do think it's important about who is going to manage it. But I'll come back onto the management plan later. We've got the Woolwich underneath, we've got DGP Properties, who I believe do not have any expertise or specialisms in this kind of area in supporting vulnerable people. Now, clearly, this is not a woman's refuge. We've got small individual units. So I'm concerned that perhaps could there be a change of use further on down the road? And then to pick up on Councillor Lynch's point, I would be concerned that this could perhaps be turned into a HMO, and I'm concerned about the antisocial behaviour. From the slide 3 that you put up with the mapping area, I can show you how close this is to the school and to the nursery, which is of a concern, which leads me back to the supervision and the management plan. Now, on point 1.3 on the management plan, it says we will describe the use and accommodation, and we will describe how it will be managed. Yet in 4.6 on page 8, it doesn't actually go into the detail of how it's going to be done, which comes back to Councillor Hunt's, what Councillor Hunt said earlier about a different property, how it will be monitored. Will there be any monitoring on this? Going back to Julie James's report, she talks about short-term accommodation, but we don't know how short-term. What are we talking about? We're talking a couple of nights, 2 nights, 3 nights, what? Because it talks about overnight stays. Again, there's no detail in the management plan about that. But it comes back to support. There's going to be a warden there 24/7. What kind of support will these people have? Is it just somebody on call, or are they actually going to have some support that will help them move forward? So again, it does matter who is administering this, who is going to be the provider of this, and what monitoring we have to ensure that they do what they say they're going to do, because obviously that's important to the whole success of the project. I had a number of concerns raised by residents because the detail hasn't been out there about how they're going to supervise. Now, in the nighttime, we know that the warden's going to be there, but in the daytime, what kind of supervision are we talking about? With it being so close, it's across the road. You can see it on your map, to the school and to the nursery. So there are a number of concerns about that. Why isn't the detail in the management plan, and why don't we know definitely who the provider of support is going to be? Have the school and nursery actually been notified? I know you don't have to, but with it being in such close proximity and with the safeguarding issues, I just wondered if they had actually now been able to respond, or if they'd been contacted, because obviously it's going to be important to them. And again, if you could come back on whether or not there could be later on down the road a change of use. Now, we've seen all the issues that have gone on in some areas in Neath. We need to know that none of these issues are going to happen in this particular type of accommodation. And I don't feel that the detail is there, certainly not in the management plan. It is quite vague in terms of going into the nitty-gritty of how they're going to do all this. And I wondered if you had any more information, because at the start of the project, there was no information. We didn't know at all about any kind of provider. And I wondered perhaps that you may have more information, Mr. Ball. Have you got any more information that's not in that management plan? Because that is not in the detail that it should be in if we're granting permission for this. Because, you know, people are setting these things up. We need to know that they can actually do what they say they're going to do and fulfill that project.
Okay, I'm just going to, because you have asked quite a lot of questions, and I want to be able to go back to Mr. Ball then to sort of get replies to your concerns. Mr. Ball, I hope you were making a bit of a list there.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, you know, ultimately, Councillor Frigo, I mean, thank you for your comments. I mean, all of these are pertinent points to the extent of an appreciation of how this type of use can have or potential unacceptable impacts, and certainly can cause community to have concerns about how it will be done. And I think ultimately what a lot of it comes down to, as you said, is the degree of control over the management of such a facility to make sure there would be no unacceptable impacts arising from it. And I mean, you said you need to know no issues will arise. I mean, obviously from a plan perspective, you know, we can't give any guarantees that no issues arise from any development. It's about making sure that we can control them, to make sure there's no unacceptable impacts arising from them, to make sure in land use planning terms that the use is acceptable. I think from my perspective, the management plan is everything I would expect it to be from a planning perspective. The issues you're raising are much more about, you know, it's about the homelessness strategy, about how individuals will occupy it, how long they will, what level of support the charity will provide for them, all those kind of things. That is not really matters for planning as such. You know, we can't control whether, you know, a management plan can't say we will see each person once a day and we'll give them individual support to make sure that they have no issues arising from any vulnerability they have, etc. That's a charity issue. That is a homelessness issue. It's not a land use planning issue. The land use plan side of thing is we need to make sure that the sufficient level of control on site is there to cater for such eventualities, so that members of this committee can be satisfied that should issues arise, that there will be someone on site to manage those in accordance with the management plan. And I'm quite comfortable, irrespective of who will occupy it, i.e. which charity, that charity needs to manage it in accordance with this management plan, and that's what the condition requires them to do. And I don't think that's going to satisfy you, Councillor Krug, but I appreciate that.
No, I'm just wondering, what control will you put in to make sure that they're doing what they say they're going to do? You said about ensuring controls and regulations. So what have you planned to put in?
Or the condition requires that the resident, I'm going to read it out verbatim, that the residential accommodation shall only be occupied as emergency accommodation, which shall at all times be operated and managed only by a registered charity. So they've got to be a registered charity who occupies the ground floor offices. In other words, they can only use it if there's a registered charity occupying those ground floor offices. And it says, and in full accordance with the provisions stipulated within the management plan for emergency refuge accommodation hereby approved, which shall be implemented at all times. So therefore, everything it says within that management plan, they need to do. So if this use were approved and commenced, and issues were arising locally, and you said, well, there isn't anyone occupying the ground floor, then we would say, well, there's breach of condition. And
how are you going to know that? What monitoring are you going to do to ensure that they're doing what they say in there?
I mean, it's not our job to monitor as planned, but what the condition is there. I mean, we have powers in place. I mean, the first thing is ward members or locals will always tell us if these issues arise, no doubt about it. So that's how these things work and important as a starting point. But irrespective of that, my enforcement team can either react to those complaints or can make visits or can serve what's called planning contravention orders if we feel there's any, or a planning contravention notice, if we feel there's any likelihood of a breach in terms of the way in which property has been occupied or managed. We can seek clarification on these points to make sure they are doing what it says on the tin effectively. There are other regulators in place on these kind of things. It isn't solely a planning matter. We do have to look at planning, land use planning matters solely, but there are always, charities are there to be run in an appropriate way and to provide the services to these vulnerable individuals occupying it for short term. And I know you said about what is short term. Again, I don't think it would be appropriate for us to say such accommodation should only be occupied for a maximum of 2 nights, because how would that work if someone is in an emergency homelessness situation and they need 6, 7, 8 nights for local authority or registered landlords to make available better or longer term accommodation for them? This is here as kind of it to provide a need while those additional regulators and additional controls are put in place to try and accommodate these individuals. So it wouldn't be appropriate to be placing restrictions on the occupancy other than manage it in accordance with the emergency refuge. So emergency refuge is just that, it's short term, isn't it? And that's what the
point, Mr. Ball. No, you're talking about the couple of nights. How would you know whether it was 3 nights or 20 nights?
I'm going to intervene, if I may, Councillor Freegard. It is not down to Mr. Ball to monitor this. He's explained that. What we have before us today is a legal use of the land. Right. Who occupies it is not for the planning committee to decide or take into account, other than the fact that it should be a registered charity, as in the conditions. So I think you're pressing Mr. Ball for assurances which he cannot give you.
No, but in the management plan, Chair, it doesn't actually go into the detail of what support they're going to give.
Should this be approved today, then, as Mr. Ball has expressed, going forward, members of the community, residents, yourself, any other pertinent person may raise concerns that they have, and then they will be acted upon. We have this in planning quite a lot. What if this happens? What if that happens? And that doesn't stop us sort of approving the application as such. What it means is there are other agencies that have to deal with this once this has actually been approved by planning. So I understand what you're saying, and I understand the residents' queries on it, but it isn't down to the planning laws to actually enforce that. So I know you're not going to be very happy with that, but today all we're here to decide is it a lawful use of the land? And under the officer's recommendation for approval, they consider that it is subject to the conditions.
Right. Knowing the conditions, Chair, could we ensure that they could not change the use of that building?
Well, they would have to apply for a separate planning application then, Councillor. That would come before the planning department, because any change of use, if it was to go to, say, I think you might fear that it might be an HMO. in going forward. That would have to come forward as a planning application in its own right at that time.
The other thing I would ask is that, and I know it's not obligatory, but whether or not that you could get the opinions of the school and the nursery that are directly affected.
Not a planning concern, councillor. Really, that's again, you're taking it to the people who are actually using the development after it's approved, and there are agencies which will, you know, we're all pretty well aware of, that will be able to deal with that. The planning application, the planning department is to decide, is it a lawful use of the land under the principles and our planning guidance. Mr. Ball, do you have anything to add?
I mean, all I was going to say, I mean, it's not our job as planners or as a local authority to canvass local opinion, to go out and, you know, ask extra people because members think we should be doing so. It's our job to statutorily publicise applications and for the community to then engage. And then I think in this one, you know, the application has been on social media. It's been, you know, it has had a number of representations. We've had nothing from the nursery. We've had nothing from the school. Even if we had, I don't believe, you know, if you're thinking because of the proximity to a school or the proximity to a nursery, that would mean that we should be refusing the application. I'm sorry, I don't agree that that would be a land use planning matter anyway. I think it's only if you start getting, you know, if we didn't have the satisfactory degree of control over it, then there may be issues. So I've said to yourselves, I think in the past, that the management plan came about particularly because I wanted to make sure that we had that control, because I felt that members would want to know the answers to the kind of questions you're asking, and you're asking slightly more detailed questions, but I think members wanted to know, and I as the manager put in this recommendation before members also wanted to know that, and I wanted to make sure we had control. If they'd come back and said this is 12 units of homeless and accommodation, and there'll be a sign on the door that says if you've got any problems phone us and we might turn up if you're lucky, you might have had a different recommendation, because I might not have been able to have the same degree of confidence to tell members that this will be managed accommodation. But we do have the confidence, the condition is there. Suzanne's right, sorry, the chair's right, that any changes to that would require planning. So if the charity stopped operating there, then they couldn't use them, and they'd need a planning application to either change use again or to remove that condition from this application, and that would then consider all these issues.
I do just have a bit of concern that the different people involved, the people that actually own it, haven't got any expertise in it, and we're relying on the wallage. If we did have control in terms of a council and ensuring and monitoring, then that would probably appease a lot of residents. But I understand the predicament.
It's not going to be able to be done under the planning application, councillor, I'm afraid.
Right.
Okay. I mean, the condition gives the relevant and required level of confidence, as far as I'm concerned, that allows us to react should issues arise, because we can, you know, if you or any of the local councillors raise issues and say this is happening, and there's no reason to believe it will, but if something happens, we can then engage with the registered charity and say these are the issues that are arising. You need to demonstrate to us that you are complying with your management plan to ensure that you're minimising such opportunities. Right. So we have that ability to then engage as a consequence of the condition.
Okay, thank you for that. So the registered charity is the Wallach.
I can't confirm or deny. That's not something I'm aware of. I have no reason to think it isn't, but it isn't about it. It isn't a material matter. It wouldn't matter, but it's not something it's been put before us. You know, DGP properties, to the best of my knowledge, aren't a registered charity.
No, they're not.
But the Wallach is. But they may line up someone completely different to manage these properties. It may well be a completely different decision. I don't know. It could be anyone. But as the chair said, it's a planning matter.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Final question: how would you know who to contact if the charity is not registered?
Or they'd be in the ground, or they'll be in the ground. They'll be in the ground floor, won't they? So whoever's managing it will be in the ground floor. So you as ward members, or I, if I drive past there and see it, would know who is managing this facility.
I think we could go on here and not reach a suitable conclusion. I understand Councillor Freegard's representations of worries from her residents, and she's done that very admirably this morning. However, I think we've established that this is an application for the use of the land legally. It doesn't matter which charity it is. And I'm sure that that's of concern to the local members and the residents, but it does not concern the planning application. That may change as well, but it's in the condition that it has to be a registered charity that is occupying the ground floor. So I'll come back to you, Councillor Freegard, but I'm going to open it up now to members of the committee. Councillor Keogh first, and then I've got Councillor Hunt. Councillor Keogh.
Thank you, Chair. To give you a bit of background to them, and I say Sharon's concerns are legitimate.
Yeah.
Now, when this was first mooted, nobody seemed to know what was happening there, because we understood at the beginning it was a women's refuge that was going in there, while there was no definitive plan at that time. But the thing is, we, as councillors, I'm going to say, we know what goes on in our wards, like other councillors know what goes on in their wards.
Yeah.
And we have concerns at the end of the day. We have to represent those people who elected us at the end of the day.
Correct.
Now, we have a significant number of problems within the top of Station Road, Talbot Road, and Corracha, and further down towards Tyrach. And the thing is that we have, as she said, we've got an old people's home opposite there. We have the school. We have the Tiny Tots nursery. We have the YMCA. Now, when Wallis was involved in running properties in Talbot Road, they were running them as flats. Sharon, at that time, when she was a new councillor, had horrendous problems, eventually, which led to an eviction of people from that property. Now, I know this doesn't bear anything to the application.
No, I'm giving you a little attitude, Councillor.
Right, I'm just giving you a little background to the problems that we have in the area. So then when we said in the beginning was, well, we're not too sure about this, and we got criticised for it. All right, fair enough. We got criticised. But the application has changed. So the thing is that what Sharon is saying is about charities. It is relevant who the charity is, because I wouldn't have any confidence in the Wallis whatsoever. But that's not for me to say. Okay. What we also thought was, is this 12 flats by the back door? You see? Because if DGB Properties are the people, I believe, are the landlords of it. Like, they own the building. They're the ones that developed the building. And as I said, they're not a registered charity. But, you know, at the end of the day, you can't really turn down this application because of the way it stands. You can't. I'm going to say it's a change of use of land. So I'm just trying to give you a bit of background on why Sharon is so passionate in what she's saying. Thank you.
Totally understand local ward members today coming to planning and, you know, very admirably representing the concerns of their residents. And that is why I am more than happy that the officers brought this to committee even before requiring, you know, members to call it in. They said this needs to come to committee, and I'm happy for that to happen. But because it is in our committee, we do have to stick to planning law, and I think that this is very similar to when we do have HMOs. We cannot say when we have an HMO application who will live there. They may be absolutely the best residents ever, or they could be the worst ones. But that's not the concern of the planning committee. The concern is it a lawful use of the land? And here we are today saying, is it a lawful use of the land to have this refuge? And the officer's recommendation is that it is. So I'm going to call in Councillor Hunt, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I think you yourself and Mr. Ball have explained, and this is why sometimes being a planning committee member is not.
It's not easy.
It's not easy. I always say, and I will say it again today, what planning does when it has an impact on the community should also be considered. we shouldn't be in a bubble of planning policies completely. I think going forward, I think planning needs to take a wider perspective of what it could possibly create within our communities, as eloquently spoken by Councillor Tregar this morning. There's a couple of issues I want to mention on the management plan. Now, firstly, Mr. Ball, I certainly welcome the idea and the principle of this application. It certainly is needed. Homeless people, for whatever reasons, need support, help. And that's why which Councillor Tregar was trying to get to the back of, is that the management plan needs to be robust and does what it says on the tin, as we keep on saying. I'm sure Chair have used that analogy very many times. So we really need something that would work. Now putting my hat on as Community Safety and Public Protection Chair, I know the issues that could potentially arise from this development, and it isn't in relationship to the planning that we are here today for, of which I will be supporting. But that's why I think Sharon sort of highlighted it, and Dennis. Now, I'm aware of situations in Neath where, and again, not all homeless people, but some homeless people have drug or alcohol addictions. They have huge problems which relates to antisocial behaviour. Now, if this management plan isn't robust enough, and I fear that, you know, with Councillor Tregar mentioned schools and so forth, it's no good us coming back and saying there's been an incident that we didn't discuss here. And I know, Chair, you're going to shut me up and tell me that it still doesn't follow the planning policies. And that's why I keep saying that sometimes we need a bit of latitude in making decisions. Now, I will be making a decision based on planning, and that will be for the application. But my heart and head, with my other cap on, is telling me there are a little bit of red flags around this application here today, and that's where I have concerns. So if our legal officer is still here, I want to know and understand that if I do have a little doubt that it maybe not managed because the answers haven't been given robustly enough, Craig, from Steve with this management plan and who's going to manage it, because even the same principles are relationship to care homes, where I've seen situations completely go wrong way because of not the management of the homes and sites, then I don't know what to do, whether to abstain, because I fear, you know, it's easy for us with HMOs, as you know, Chair. We follow the guidelines and rules and regulations, and we pass them regularly. I don't want to pass HMOs in particular wards, but I've been told under planning rules and regulations, unless I've got something I can say to go against them, then I have no reason, with a planning reason, sorry, to go against that application. So it's the same principle here this morning, or this afternoon now, is that can I have a bit of advice? And I'm a long-serving member, and I still get confused, but right. I do feel that, do we look at the bigger picture, that potential, not just planning, or is it only planning and vote appropriately? I think you get where I'm coming from.
Absolutely get where you're coming from, Councillor Hunt.
I thank you for your time.
You have raised a pertinent point. I'm going to go to Craig Griffiths now, because you have asked him directly. Craig, could you please answer Councillor Hunt? Does he stick with the planning regulation, even though he may have a niggling doubt as to something going forward from that, Craig?
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hunt, for the question. Absolutely. The issue you've got to consider when you're making your determination here today is on the basis of the planning issues alone, effectively, as part of that decision making. However, what you've got to look at then with the other issues that obviously you're identifying is how you can use the other tools that are at your disposal to be able to consider those matters. So considering the basis on the planning issues alone, obviously, as you've heard from the officers, that there's no reason from a planning perspective, obviously, to turn down this application. If you have concerns then ultimately that what may happen may have a rise in respect of antisocial behaviour, or you become aware of issues in respect of the property, it's looking at the other forums ultimately then where they can be addressed. So that could be discussions obviously with local police organisations. That could be used in your role as the chair of the scrutiny committee in respect of community safety and different elements there, liaising with officers in the council who work within that sort of area as well. So my advice to members today is to look at it in respect of the planning matters that are before you. But if you have legitimate concerns about those issues, use then the other forums where you can ultimately then get involved, look to see how matters are progressing, and use those avenues to try and drive forward then the issues that you may have in respect of the community and those issues going down the line, because there would be numerous avenues you would be able to consider in that regard, both internal to the council and with other bodies then, such as police, social housing organisations, whether it's whoever the charities could be ultimately occupying, and you take it forward then in that regime. So,
thank you, Mr. Griffiths. Councillor Hunt, are you satisfied with the answer you've received?
Yeah, that's a very comprehensive answer, and I know where Craig is coming from, and I appreciate it. I appreciate you asking him to give me that response, Chair.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Absolutely. Got Councillor Vice Chair, Councillor Sean Percy indicating, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, for calling me in. It's been quite a debate on this one, actually. I've read the management plan, and I don't know whether I'm seeing this from a different angle to other members, but it's given me more confidence than it seems to have given other members. There's quite a specific, reference to individual needs evaluation of the tenants, assessing whether they've got any substance misuse issues, how much support they need, and ensuring they're identified, when they're put into that accommodation. And there is a 24-hour warden there as well, which is accessed internally from the property, so that residents can access support without having to go out onto the street and sort of back in or to another venue. So I've certainly got confidence that they've really considered these sort of management aspects in terms of antisocial behaviour and disturbance to residents. If that was going to occur, they've covered all of those eventualities by having someone on site. And I just wanted to sort of flag that up because it's towards the bottom of the document. It's on pages 7 and 8. But I think that goes into quite some detail actually as to how practically they're going to ensure they've got the right support for those residents. And I just wanted to say that gives me quite a bit of confidence. If that wasn't there, I would have a lot more concern, and I appreciate the work of officers and local members in getting these robust conditions in place, because I think that was certainly the right thing to do.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I will also second this to Steve Ball as well. I mean, you've gone the extra mile in getting the management plan, even included, as you alluded to earlier. It wasn't a necessity to get that, but you have included it for the purposes of trying to make sure that members voting today can have some measure of assurance as to the way it's going to be run. So I thank you for that. If no other members are going to speak, I am going to return back to Councillor Freegard for closing remarks. Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. I know it's really difficult. You're there just to look at the planning side of things. I disagree with Councillor Percy. I think the semantics are that they're not accountable within that management plan, and it should be far more emphatic and in detail. But that's regards the management plan. And I do think that we need to know who the registered charity is going to be. I don't think that is robust enough on that side of things. as we have so many objections around that area. But I know you're there just to look at the use of the land. But I am flagging up these possible areas of what could, you know, the things that could happen in terms of, like Councillor Lynch said, about antisocial behaviour and things like that, and safeguarding issues, just in case they should happen in the future. But I do agree that we should be looking at planning perhaps, and I know it's not your job in the wider context of the impact on communities, because communities are becoming so disfragmented now, and I think that should be included really. But I just wanted to say that. But thank you for letting me speak this morning.
Absolutely. I'm sure that members will know by now that if any local member wishes to raise something in planning, I'll bend over backwards to try and accommodate that local member. I'm only sorry sometimes that, because we have to adhere to the strict rules and regulations of planning, that sometimes local members go away a little bit disheartened. But I do take on board what you've said and what other members have said about planning. We need to perhaps address Welsh Government, because they are the ones that need to change the rules regarding certain things here, so that we can actually take on board what Councillor Hunter said, the implications going forward of what we decide. But at the moment, we've had the advice of Craig Griffiths that we deal only with the use of the land here, and therefore Steve Ball's recommendation and the team is that it is approved with conditions. And unless somebody else has anything to say, I would like to take you to the recommendation on page 70 to approve this planning application with the conditions listed. So do I have somebody to propose, please?
Happy to propose, Chair.
I propose.
Oh, right. So Councillor Hunt and Councillor Davis then seconded. Hunt and Davis. Okay, once more then, Tammy, if you could take the voting members through the procedure of have they been here for the whole event and which way do they want to vote?
Certainly, Chair, thank you. I'll start with yourself. Have you been here for the whole item and how do you wish to vote?
Yes, I've been here and I wish to vote for the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. Same question to Councillor Sean Percy, Vice Chair, please.
Yes, Tammy, I've been here for the whole item and I will be voting for the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members of the committee, have you been present for the whole item and how do you wish to vote? Councillor Dennis Keogh, please.
Yes, Tammy, I've been here for the entire presentation. I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Rose Davis.
I've been present for the whole item and I'm voting in favour of the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Ridian Mason.
Yes, Tammy, I've been present for the whole agenda item and I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Hunt, please.
Yes, I've also been present for the whole agenda item and I'm voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Arwyn Mulcock.
Yes, Chair, confirmed that I've been present for the whole agenda item, voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Suzanne Renkers.
I've been here for the whole item and I vote for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Prothero.
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, I confirm I've been here for the whole agenda item and I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Rachel Taylor, please.
Thanks, Tammy. I can confirm I've been here for the entire item and I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. That's unanimous, Chair. This application has been approved.
Thank you, Tammy, very much. I'll move on to item 8, urgent items. I have no urgent items, but just before I say goodbye, I'm going to echo Councillor Hunt's sentiments here that being on planning is not the easiest job in the world. So I do accept every member of the committee's attention and consideration, and also to the local members who have spoken very eloquently here today. So that being said, I now close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair.